Alexander Acosta was sworn in as the 27th United States Secretary of Labor in April of this year. He's the son of Cuban refugees, a native of Miami, Florida, and a first-generation college graduate. He earned his undergraduate and law degrees from Harvard University. Following law school, he worked as a clerk for Justice Samuel Alito, who was then at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He then worked at the law firm of Kirkland & Ellis and went on to teach at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia School of Law. Secretary Acosta has served in 3 different presidentially appointed and Senate-confirmed positions. In 2002, he was appointed to serve as a member of the National Labor Relations Board, where he participated in or authored more than 125 NLRB opinions. In 2003, he was then appointed Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and then from 2005 to 2009, he served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Most recently, as you know, he's been serving as Secretary of Labor. Immediately preceding that, he was the Dean of the Florida International University College of Law. I was pleased to meet Secretary Acosta last June when a number of governors were invited to the White House to talk about apprenticeships. He was at the table there. We've since spoken by telephone and then had breakfast this morning together. He is a great guy. He has an attitude that is, I know, going to help all of us solve our workforce needs, and I'm pleased to welcome him to South Dakota. Please join me in welcoming the United States Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta.
So, Governor, thank you again. It's it's such a pleasure to be here, especially because of your leadership with the Western Governors Association. The governor and I had breakfast this morning, and it was, I think, the 3rd or 4th conversation that we've had in the span of just a few weeks about workforce issues. It's something that the governor is keenly aware of. It's something the governor is a leader in, and I think under his leadership, the Western Governors Association is going to play a critical role in expanding workforce and solving workforce issues for the Western states this year. And so for me, this is a wonderful opportunity, and I'm truly gratified to be here. You know, the partnership between state and federal government is critical. And we in the Trump administration recognize that and very much respect the role of governors and the role of states. Governors set the tone. They know best what their state workforce needs. They know what works and what doesn't work in a particular state. We recognize that each state is different. And as I was speaking with some folks here today, that theme came up again and again. What works for a large East Coast state doesn't work for a state in the Plains and doesn't work for a state in the West. Each state is different, and that is something Washington needs to recognize. At the federal level, the Department of Labor is focused on the president's top 3 priorities: jobs, and even more jobs. And it's really that simple, right? The administration's eliminated unneeded regulation and spurring job creation. And we're seeing a renewed spirit of optimism. So since January, we've had more than 860,000 net jobs created. We're hoping with tomorrow's job figures that will reach close to 1 million. Unemployment has fallen to the lowest level in 16 years. U6, there are 6 different measures of unemployment. U6, which is the broadest measure that measures individuals that are also marginally attached, has fallen almost 1 percentage point, 0.8%. African-American unemployment is the lowest since 2000. Teenage unemployment is the lowest since 2000. The stock market has hit a high and hit a high and hit a high. And inflation, despite everyone thinking is going to go up, remains low at 1.6%. So that's not bad for 6 months. You know, the pressure is how to keep it going. Well, here in the West, you're all doing phenomenally well. Western states' average unemployment is below 4%. Here in South Dakota, your unemployment rate is an incredibly low 3%. And two of your close neighbors lead the United States with a 2.3% unemployment rate, Colorado and North Dakota. And 2.3% is really incredible. And so we're optimistic, but we can't be satisfied until Americans of all abilities that are seeking jobs have good and safe jobs. And so today I want to challenge, actually, let me rephrase. Today I'd like to ask your participation and assistance on two key initiatives that are flowing from this administration and from the Department of Labor. First, as many of you know, President Trump recently signed an executive order to address the skills gap. And the skills gap is this. We have nearly 6 million job vacancies in the United States. As you talk to job creators, they will say, we have open jobs. And it is the highest number since they started keeping this statistic, 6 million. And here in the West, and I just confirmed the number this morning, you have 1.25 million open jobs among the states represented here. Now, Americans want to work, and American companies want to hire. We have a substantial gap, however, between the skills that are demanded in these open job vacancies and the skills that are offered by the workforce. I had the occasion to visit the G20 meeting of labor ministers, and this issue isn't unique to America. It's talked about again and again by the labor ministers of all the G20 nations. But imagine the growth and competitive advantage our nation could have if we could address this skills gap and if we could close that skills gap. And so it's not just an issue here at home, but it's an issue that affects our competitiveness on the global stage. Now, changes to education are certainly needed, and I know you've talked about some of those, and I'm happy to talk about some of those in the questions and answers. A focus on demand-driven education that teaches the skills demanded by the workplace can help address what is an unacceptable college completion rate and an unacceptable post-college employment metric. All of you saw the graphs the governor put up earlier today. The percentage of students that actually start versus finish college is only 60%, not acceptable. And of those, how many go on to get a job? And how long do they take to finish college? We also need to make clear, however, that many family-sustaining career paths are available outside the four-year degree system. You've got associate's degrees, you have vocational education. More basically, we need to reaffirm the dignity of work. And I want to say this because I want to recount a story. I was in Denver about a week ago, and I met a woman who shared with me, after my remarks, a story about her daughter. And her daughter attended college, and she graduated, but her son-in-law did not. And so her daughter, the college graduate, is working in retail and making just north of $40,000 a year. Her daughter's husband, her son-in-law, did not attend college and is working as a mechanic, but he's making almost $80,000 a year, almost twice the salary. Yet she told me her daughter is embarrassed to tell her college friends about his career as a mechanic. We need great mechanics just like we need great doctors. We need great carpenters just like we need great lawyers. Many well-paying careers are available to those without a college degree. Last week, Georgetown University released a report, Good Jobs That Pay Without a Bachelor's Degree. More than 30 million jobs in the United States don't require a four-year degree and have an average salary of $55,000 or more. More than 30 million jobs. They defined a good job as a job over $55,000, and they found that 36,000 jobs, good jobs, needed a college degree, and 30,000 30 million did not need a college degree, but 36 million did. And so it was about 50-50, right? And so I think it's unfortunate that the college graduate that I referenced earlier is embarrassed by her husband's career choice. I think it's even more unfortunate that society encourages or allows this. We need to find value in the career that each and every American chooses to pursue. Now, the President's executive order authorizes the Department of Labor to certify industry-created apprenticeship programs. And I want to talk a little bit about how an industry-created apprenticeship program will work. Pharmacies, for example, have told me that they need to find more pharmacy technicians. Well, an industry group working, if appropriate, in conjunction with labor, could create an apprenticeship that could be offered by CVS, by Walgreens, by Rite Aid, and by others. The apprenticeship could combine work-based experience with more traditional education. Apprentices would work while they also learn from online or in-person education. Cooperating community colleges could recognize this educational component for credit. This model has so many advantages, and it's well known to governors. Apprentices earn while they learn. Apprentices avoid the burden of student debt. When we saw the figures earlier about 40% of the students starting college and not finishing, we should mention they didn't get their degree, but they did walk away with student debt. So apprentices avoid the burden of student debt. And studies show that apprentices enjoy excellent job prospects. In fact, the average graduate of an apprenticeship program has an average starting salary of nearly $60,000, which is actually higher by almost $10,000 than the average college graduate. That tells you a lot. And so, unlike the prior administration, we're not going to micromanage this. These will not come from Washington. These have to come from states and from localities and from industry, because one size does not fit all. And we look forward to working with trade and industry companies, nonprofits, unions, joint labor management organizations, and so many other groups to develop the apprenticeships that meet the needs of your state and your industry. Now, I should say, this model has been successful. The building trades have been using this model for years. You know, the building trades invest nearly $1 billion of private sector money into training and education for individuals that are going into the building trades each year. Nearly $1 billion of private sector money, no government money involved. We'd like to expand that model across all industries. And so Mercuria, for example, has an apprenticeship program in commodities trading operations. I met one individual who actually had a master's in business, but didn't know how to engage in commodities trading operations. And so he, alongside someone that didn't have a master's, both joined that apprenticeship program. And both of them are working at Mercuria today because of that Earn While You Learn apprenticeship program. From the building trades to commodities trading operations, apprenticeship programs are appropriate for all industries. And your partnership encouraging businesses in your states to establish and participate in these is critical as this program is rolled out on a national level. Second, I want to ask for your leadership on another really important issue, and that's reducing excessive licensing. The governor and I spoke a little bit about that this morning. I recently read an article in one of the New York City papers about a New York City licensing requirement. It seems that Kennel successfully lobbied to restrict dog sitting to licensed professionals only. I'm not joking. And so individuals found illegally dog sitting a neighbor's pet can be fined $1,000. And so I want to really understand this, and I want you all to help me. It's okay to babysit a neighbor's child without a license, but it's not okay to dog sit without a license, right? And in parts of Maryland, you need a license to be a fortune teller. It costs, I believe, $393.75, and you have to provide references attesting to your integrity and honesty. and you have to pay that fee every year. And so humor aside, some licenses that satisfy valid health and safety needs are certainly appropriate. But most licenses simply limit competition, bar entry, or create a privileged class. More than 1,100 licenses, or more than 1,100 careers are now licensed in at least one state. And here's a figure that I found amazing. A few decades ago, less than 1 in 20 Americans needed a license to work. Today, more than 1 in 4 Americans need to have a license to do something fairly simple, which is to work. Think about that. So first, the cost and complexity of licensing creates an economic barrier for Americans seeking a job, especially for those with fewer financial resources. $400 a year to get a license is not a small fee. Second, excessive licensing creates a barrier for Americans that move from state to state. And geographic mobility is incredibly important for our economy and for families that are looking to move. And third, excessive licensing creates a barrier for Americans looking to leverage technology to expand their job opportunities. And I want to talk about each of these in turn. So turning to the first issue, excessive licensing does impose a direct and significant economic cost on job seekers. The financial costs are obvious, $400 a year for a license, $1,000 a year for a license, but I want to focus on the time cost as well. The national average to become a licensed cosmetologist so that you can actually be a cosmetologist is 370 days. To practice cosmetology in some states, you now need 490 days of training. For Americans living paycheck to paycheck, investing the time and money to obtain these licenses is a substantial burden. And so the question becomes, is that a justified burden? Is that justified? So the Mercatus Center at George Mason University looked into this, and they did a study. They looked at opticians. Opticians, as you know, are those that help you select and fit your eyeglasses. 21 states require that opticians be licensed. 29 do not. One state represented here requires more than 1,000 hours of education before someone can assist you in selecting and fitting your eyeglasses. Several states here do not require a license. And so this study looked to see if eyeglasses were better fitted and better selected in the state that required 1,000 hours of education versus the states that did not. And it found that, in fact, there was no measurable difference in the fit for eyeglasses. And so the question is that a necessary distinction, or is that a barrier to entry? Is that anti-competition, or is that pro-consumer? A related issue is the barrier to workforce mobility that arises from differences in licensing requirements among states. When a member of our military is reassigned across state lines, his or her spouse typically moves as well. And the same is true when a civilian finds another job or is likewise reassigned. And this presents an incredible problem for the trailing spouse, a difficult choice. Yesterday, I had the honor of meeting a number of military spouses. And what I said to them is, folks tell the service person, thank you for your service, but we should be telling the military spouse, thank you for your service as well. Because they face the following choice. Do they stay behind, creating a distance in their family structure? Do they give up their career? Do they move to a state that requires additional licensing requirements and engage in duplicative education, or not work while they await further license? These are real issues. And as we went around the table, each and every spouse said, our career is limited because every time we move, we need to decide, do we want to apply for a new license? Do we want to go through the duplicative education? Will they recognize the seniority from the state where we came? Would they recognize the education and training that we received? And you know, they're serving in their own way alongside their service member spouse, and they don't deserve to be treated that way. Finally, as technology changes, the barriers created by unneeded licensing becomes more costly and less rational. And I want to provide one example, which is telemedicine. It offers new opportunities for nurses and physicians. However, some medical professions cannot offer telelicensing in certain states. There are 22 states that have come together in an interstate medical licensure compact, but some of the largest states in our nation are not involved. Now, we recognize the importance of telemedicine, yet overlook, in addition, many other careers that could equally benefit from technology that provides access to interstate markets. Interior design, for example, is something that is often licensed. It strikes me that interior design advice in the era of the internet and in the era of so many houses that are looked at and bought online, that interior design and other consulting services could be offered online. Our goal should be to expand opportunities for Americans and not to limit them. So all told, the cost of these barriers is real and measurable. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis estimates that licensing reduces total non-farm payroll by 1.3% nationwide. Put differently, the Federal Reserve estimates that about 2 million Americans do not hold a job or have given up their career because of licensing issues. Misallocation of resources of about $170 billion. The numbers are staggering. And I should say, this is the Federal Reserve study, which is conservative because the Brookings Institute estimates that the cost is closer to 3 million jobs nationwide. States have addressed the excessive licensing to some extent, but more action is needed. Taking up this issue is one way you, as state leaders, can have immediate, consequential, and measurable impact. You have a tremendous opportunity to help create millions of jobs without spending a single dime. We are committed to working with you to strengthen our economy and empower the American workforce. Americans want principled, broad-based reform. If licenses are unnecessary, eliminate them. If they are needed, streamline them. And if they're honored in one state, consider honoring them in your own state. And so let me say in conclusion, I look forward to more conversations with you and with your colleagues in the future. If I leave you with one theme, though, I'd like to leave you with this. The American workforce is our greatest economic asset. Americans are hardworking, Americans are creative, and Americans are entrepreneurial. By integrating skills into education at all levels, we can ensure that Americans can work in the career of their own choosing and that we provide dignity to that choice. And by removing unnecessary licensing that is a barrier to jobs, we can create even more jobs for every American. And so we're prioritizing 3 very simple things through these actions: jobs, and even more jobs. And I thank you for your efforts in that vision. Thank you.
Secretary, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Secretary Acosta has agreed to answer some questions. I'm going to start out. First, I want to say I was very distressed to hear about the Maryland fortune teller rules. If you have to be honest and have integrity, that closes things off for virtually every politician I know. So I'm glad that rule does not prevail in South Dakota. The avenue remains open to me. But let's begin. First, I know we had a good conversation at breakfast about apprenticeships, and I talked a little bit about the misconception that I think prevails among many employers that because there are young people who are disallowed from working in certain occupations, that an educational experience tied to that work is impossible. And I'm wondering if you could clarify just a little bit about that or talk about your willingness to work with the states on that particular issue.
certainly, and so the governor and I had a very productive breakfast conversation, and he indicated the concerns that he and that others here have expressed over that, and so what I committed to the governor and what I'll commit to you all is we're going to take a very close look at this, and we need to make sure that we provide educational opportunities for individuals that are interested in pursuing their career, irrespective of what that choice is. And often that means starting that opportunity in the high schools. And so when I get back to Washington later tonight, tomorrow morning I'm going to be talking to my staff. And I've committed to the governor to review the rules and see if we need to look at specific rules around apprenticeships so that individuals can receive education in apprenticeships that they want to pursue. That's incredibly important. Those apprenticeships would be supervised, they're educational in nature, and if they need a separate set of rules, we will look into that.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that I had was, across all of our states, we have, by different names, job centers or one-stop centers or career employment offices. What do you see as the future for those kinds of offices looking ahead?
Right. So those offices are very important because they do provide a one-stop for various services that are available to individuals in the workforce. But as I said earlier, we respect the role of governors and we respect the role of leaders of the states that are here today because you set the tone and you know what's needed in your state. And so, for example, I was talking to a state secretary of labor just a few minutes ago who said that they've got an allocation when it comes to youth that they have to spend 75% in one category and 25% in the other. But in this particular state, the youth needs are not 75-25%. And that, you know, that makes a lot of sense to me that each state would have different percentages because each state is different. And New York and South Dakota and California and Colorado are different states with different needs, just to cite a few. And so we've requested from Congress that we have the ability to provide governors greater flexibility in the spending of the WIOA money, which is the money that funds these programs within these one-stop centers, because our view is that you know what is best for your states. And to the extent that I have authority to grant requests for flexibility, my view is that I should look at those very closely and, as a general matter, believe that you know what is important for your state better than we know what is important for your state because you're a lot closer. And so I think those centers are very important, but I think those centers artificially restrict their services by having mandated percentages in the various programs, and they would be better served by providing greater flexibility. So if you as governor want to use some of that money to establish apprenticeships, you should have the discretion to do that.
Questions from the audience? Is that okay, Joe? Yeah. Joe's got the microphone there. And Tim, will you watch the clock and let us know when we need to cut off? Thank you.
Secretary Acosta, my name is Chris Howman. I'm president of Malloy Electric, and my question relates to testing. We test and test and test our kids, yet my question is, would it make sense to add a section to the test that is related to aptitude? So these kids can come home and make an argument that, hey, mom and dad, I don't need to go to college and get saddled with $70,000 in debt. I could be a really good electrician, and the tests support that.
So I think that's certainly an option for states to consider. You know, I think the larger, premise behind your question is, are we biasing choice? Are we as a society saying that you should do this and not that? And so I guess I want to sort of offer a story of an individual that I know who wanted to be a police officer. And so he went to college and majored in criminal justice. And today, last I checked, is not a police officer because along the way, he didn't go to the police academy and he didn't get policing skills. He majored in criminal justice. And the study of criminal justice is related to but different than the skills that police officers need on a day-to-day basis on the street. And so my question is this. In high school, if someone says we want to be a police officer, are they guided into policing or are they guided into college? If someone says we want to be an electrician, does the counselor say, oh, you don't want to be the electrician, you want to go into engineering and bias the choice? Or does the counselor, whether it's through testing or through knowing the individual, say, you know, electricians make a great living, and you can have a family-sustaining wage as an electrician, and here's how you go about doing it. And so the governor shared a story with me earlier today that he might share with you about an individual who was a philosophy major and is now studying HVAC because that's what he wants to do. And wouldn't it have been great if early on someone could have said, you know, here are things that you should think about, here are careers you should be exposed to, and here are the earnings associated with various careers so you can make an informed choice. And if testing should be part of that, that's an issue for the states, but that would certainly be appropriate.
Eric Rose from the Montana University System. I want to convey our state's appreciation of the significant investments that the U.S. Department of Labor has made through the TAC grants. We received round 3 and round 4 funding and have been very successful, both with economic impact as well as civil rights impact with a lot of our minority groups. Right. I'm wondering if the Department of Labor has any plans to continue any such investments to the state that target specific training areas and provide states with the flexibility to allow recruitment, advising, and then placement into these high-need, high-wage jobs.
So let me say, pick up on a few words that you said. Flexibility to the states, I think, is key. Certainly, a large part of our budget flows right through to the states, and it provides the states the flexibility to address their state's individual needs as Montana is doing. And I think ultimately that flexibility needs to exist and needs to be maximized because each state knows how to do this in their own way better than I believe we do in Washington. Let me also say that one of the great things about apprenticeships is they can lead to a much more diversity. And so there's this great program coming out of University of Maryland. Northrop Grumman went to University of Maryland and said, we want more individuals in cybersecurity, and here's what we need. And University of Maryland worked with them and developed a multi-course sequence for individuals that are interested in cybersecurity. And the individuals intern at Northrop Grumman, and they're given mentors from Northrop Grumman. And when they graduate, I believe 95% of the individuals go to Northrop Grumman. And so there's this fabulous picture that I keep near my chair in the office, because whenever I'm talking about it, I like to say a picture's worth 1,000 words, of an incredibly diverse class going into cybersecurity of men and women, right? And that's an area where often you don't see gender balance. But in the apprenticeship program at the University of Maryland, you see gender balance, and you see racial diversity. And you see it because they're tapping into the diversity at University of Maryland early on and encouraging through providing role models and mentors and other things, diverse individuals to go into cybersecurity. And so I mentioned that because I know that's what Montana is doing in part through its program, and that's yet another advantage of businesses working directly with educational institutions or through the apprenticeship programs. You know, business and education need to talk so much more. And I'm hearing that the businesses are willing to put up the money and to participate in the education if the educational institutions are willing to listen. And so demand-driven education is really a great thing.
Hi, Secretary Acosta. It's Bill Simons from the Global Pathways Institute at Arizona State. We're committed to changing the culture of education to put the focus on helping young people find successful careers, not just a degree or a test score. But I wanted to raise an issue that's actually not under your direct responsibility, but which is very related to your mission to create jobs, increase the labor force participation rate. And that's the federal investment in career and technical education. You know, those of us who work in this area feel that CTE is one of the most effective federal programs because it provides training to help students go into fields like auto mechanics that you cited. For many years, the funding has been frozen at about $1 billion. And this year, in President Trump's budget, the proposal is to cut it by 15%. And it really surprised many of us in the field when that came out because it seems to go contrary to what the president said during the campaign, that he wants to put people to work. Many of these programs are really underfunded. The result is that students aren't able to study auto mechanics or hospitality or whatever. And I just wanted to raise that to your concern, if you could look into it. You know, it's managed by the Department of Education, but I think it's very closely related to the goals of the Department of Labor.
And so thank you, and I'm happy to look into it. You know, the Department of Education and the Department of Labor really need to work hand in hand, and Betsy DeVos and I have been doing so. Because the Department of Education has an office, has an assistant secretary for vocational education, and I have, you know, an assistant secretary with a very large budget for workforce education. And it seems to me that one really is the other, and that there needs to be much closer cooperation and much less siloing. Let me just say more generally, a discussion that we've been having that I think is important to look at is whether there should be more flexibility on the part of the student in how to allocate federal assistance, and whether they should have greater choice in allocating that as they're choosing their educational program, because in some ways that is now limited to particular educational programs, primarily the more traditional degree-seeking programs. And what if that is not the individual's choice? Should they not have access to that federal assistance? Should they have to walk away from 529 money? These are, I think, very important questions that we need to be asking. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Governor, for the opportunity to be here today.